decade should begin with a Paul McCartney one-man band record, and this one requires it the most. McCartney III continues his legacy of self-produced solo albums, similar to his acoustic 1970 debut and 1980 synth-pop oddity McCartney II. It's Macca at his most playful, just like his two predecessors. He's not worried about being a legend, a genius, or a Beatle. He's just a family man in quarantine, penning a few songs to keep his creative juices running. He's been on lockdown, hanging out on his daughter's farm, grandchildren on his knee, strumming his acoustic guitar in the English summer light. It's the friendliest and most welcoming of quarantine albums. It's Ram meets Folklore. So in today's video, we will talk about this quarantine album that Paul released during the pandemic. Think about the anxiety and depression most of us went through during the pandemic. How much of a blessing it was from Paul that he released his albums so that we could get through this difficult phase. Paul McCartney has created over 30 solo albums and scores of hits since the Beatles officially disbanded in 1970. They've included ragged, folksy home recordings, propulsive, glossy rock, children's music with singing frogs, covers of 1950s R&B favorites, duets with Carl Perkins, Michael Jackson, and Stevie Wonder, collaborations with members of Led Zeppelin and the Royal Liverpool Symphony Orchestra, and forays into disco, ambient techno, and cut-and-paste soundscapes. The Beatles only recorded 12 full studio albums, totaling 9 hours of music. The recordings made statements, but McCartney seemed constantly doodling, chasing a career of whims and compulsions. Wings were created in 1971 by him and his then wife, Linda, possibly so that they may spend more time together as a family. It was just something we wanted to do, she explained. He explained, so if we got it wrong, no big deal. He described an album from the 1980s as a mess around. Even when he put together Pure McCartney, a 2016 retrospective of his post-Beatles career, he dismissed any grandiose intention, stating it was merely something fun to listen to. McCartney takes his profession and his career very seriously, but he's a living legend who seems more concerned with scratching a chronic itch than tending to his legacy. In 1969 and 1970, he made his solo debut in secret. The Beatles were breaking up, and he was depressed. The album, McCartney, is a breakup record, though its pain is manifested less in the lyrics than in the song's shredded edges. The album is replete with beautiful, half-finished tunes that forsake the perfectionism to which Beatles fans had been used to, perplexing listeners. The lovely Linda begins as a lovely homage to his wife, but abruptly ends as McCartney bursts out laughing. As Wings disbanded in the 1980s, McCartney recorded a sequel, McCartney II, in which he abandoned rock classicism in favor of synthesizers and drum machines. He said it wasn't a masterpiece to an interviewer, but it was complete freedom. How many of you resonated with McCartney II as complete freedom? Share your thoughts on that album as well. As the pandemic ravaged the world this year, McCartney and his family escaped to his farm in East Sussex. He applied his tremendous work ethic to home recording and began tinkering with a fragment of a song he'd written in the 1990s. He created a complete album, McCartney III, which will be released on December 18th. The title track, Long-Tailed Winter Bird, encapsulates the one-man approach. He begins by strumming his guitar lightly, almost as if tuning it, and then works out a raga-like pattern. Layers are added, including a welcoming bass line, background coos, electric guitar, pounding drumming, violins, and woodwinds. It goes on for a little longer than required, as if he's simply playing about. McCartney begins Deep Deep Feeling by riffing on the highs and lows of love, exhausting the rhyming possibilities of the word emotion with devotion, ocean, and motion. He adds an ethereal synth line and a stretched out blues guitar to create storminess that his words never fully describe. In the popular perception of the Beatles, John Lennon was the agonized, hard-driving dreamer, the one reaching for the impossible goal or plunging into his deep depths. McCartney was the easier one to get along with. He was friendly and playful and only pathological about songwriting. He composed tunes and abandoned them since there was always more to write. McCartney III contains a few instances that evoke a sense of delight. Lavatory Lil, a minor blues boogie, recalls the Beatles' Abbey Road with its juvenile, character-driven compositions. Since the 1990s, several of McCartney's albums have been recorded in a fashion that reflects his glory days and influence on British music. Sometimes, it's like he's singing over a cover of a Beatles song, and other times it sounds like he's joining in on the fun of disciples like Oasis or Adele. The most moving parts of McCartney III are when his age and limitations are revealed. He works his way through The Kiss of Venus, a wonderful acoustic ballad, his voice softly tracking an increasing guitar melody. He sounds wobbly on Women and Wives, as if he's losing control of his instrument. You'll be staring at the future when tomorrow comes around. He sings firmly, so keep your feet firmly planted and prepare to run. A trollish online debate occurred a few years ago about whether the Atlanta rap trio Migos was better than the Beatles. A variation occurred in my college dorm in the 1990s, with Boyz II Men as the challenger. The upstart has no chance of winning this debate. It appears to merely reinforce the Beatles as a cultural monolith. Invoking their name connects us to the potential of some widely accepted standard of excellence, a kind of agreement that no longer appears to be within reach. In this approach, McCartney can appear as a symbol rather than a person. 4-5 Seconds, a 2015 song by Rihanna and Kanye West, is currently his most streamed song on Spotify. It has 700 million listeners, about 200 million more than Here Comes the Sun. Kanye and Rihanna are the stars of the song. McCartney's involvement appears to be a gesture, a means for them to connect to the canon. However, McCartney seemed to enjoy these encounters with the zeitgeist. When Ray Shremmerd's Black Beatles, streamed 130 million times more than Here Comes the Sun, became the music for a viral mannequin challenge in 2016, McCartney participated by making a video of himself frozen while playing a grand piano. "Love those Black Beatles," he tweeted. Recently, McCartney has sung on a tune produced by the Bloody Beetroots and performed with Nirvana's surviving members. He appears on the cover of Rolling Stone this month with Taylor Swift. Such moments connect younger artists to history. McCartney's current fascination with youth satisfies his curiosity. However, a septuagenarian ex-Beatle will likely be unable to comprehend the anxious world that his musical offspring have inherited. The pandemic has offered an opportunity for younger musicians, such as Taylor Swift, Charli XCX, and BTS, to release music that addresses the isolation and loneliness of a modern living. In contrast, McCartney's approach to the pandemic album is distinct, upbeat, and resilient, and always looking forward. One of the Beatles' most striking messages to baby boomers is that life gets better. It's improving all the time. McCartney's idealism is timeless. When the chilly days arrive, when the old ways fade away, there will be no more sun, and we'll wish that we had hung on to the day. He sings over warm electric keys in Seize the Day. He returns to the album's opening guitar lick for the album's magnificent closer, Winter Bird, When Winter Comes. The song then transitions into a folk melody that doubles as a chore list for his farm: mend a fence, dig a drain, plant some trees. Time passes, he observes, and the trees will eventually cast shade. The influence is that McCartney will not be present to see them. Perception of what is possible. We'd all like to believe that love will triumph, that the earth will heal itself, and will leave the world a better place than we found it. He's composed this song dozens of times, but it now sounds a little different. McCartney III isn't as elaborate as Egypt Station. It's a spontaneous palate cleanser after a laborious studio production, much like his first two self-titled solo albums. McCartney followed Abbey Road with acoustic lyrics like Every Night and The Lovely Linda, which he recorded at home on his fancy new tape equipment. McCartney II followed the final Wings album, the underwhelming Back to the Egg. It had a genuinely crazy #1 success with Coming Up, and the buried gem Temporary Secretary, which lay unappreciated for decades before the world determined it was fantastic. McCartney III has the same stripped-down style, except for when he cranks up the synths and attempts to rock out. It reaches a high point with The Kiss of Venus, a pastoral romance that floats like a modernized Mother Nature's son, with him hitting sad high notes in his finely aged voice. He closes with When Winter Comes, a gritty account of farm life. At first, it sounds like a farmer's task list, such as must dig a drain by the carrot crop, but it's also an image of late-life domestic happiness, with two elderly lovers warming their toes by the fire after being forced to stay home by the cold. This song has an unexpected emotional force, almost like it's a reverse side to When I'm 64, with Paul looking back from the brink of 78. The albums were targeted when Paul made 1970s farmcore declarations like Ram and Red Rose Speedway. But to his delight, he's lived long enough to witness a new generation rightfully regard these recordings as cult masterpieces. One of my nephews, Jay, said, "Ram's my all-time favorite album." He told Rolling Stone in 2016, "I assumed it was dead and gone, festering in the manure pile. As a result, I listened to it. Wow, I understand what I was doing. The satisfaction must be sweet." That's part of McCartney III's allure. He's not angry at the winter, it's just a chance for the master to relax and smile. So there you have it. This was McCartney's pandemic album, which deserves a lot of respect for offering content while attempting to adapt it to modern ways. Tell us about your experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We'll see you in the next one.